Now, the Defence Secretary, Sir Michael Fallon, has personally apologised to the mother of a soldier killed in a lightly armoured vehicle in a letter seen by the BBC. Sue Smith's son, Private Philip Hewitt, was killed by an improvised explosive device in Iraq in 2005. Now, the snatched Land Rovers that he was travelling in at the time were highly controversial. You'll remember this because we talked about it a lot at the time. Many people criticised them for being too lightly armed and lacking sufficient protection. And in fact, at least 37 British Army personnel were killed as a result of travelling in those when explosives went off. They were branded as coffins on wheels. Last year, Sir John Chilcot's Iraq inquiry found that the Ministry of Defence was too slow to adopt new, stronger armoured vehicles for troops. Well, Hilary Meredith is visiting Professor of Law and Veterans Affairs at Chester University and a solicitor who's represented military families. Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
How significant is it, do you think, for Sue Smith, who campaigned tirelessly on this issue after her son's death? How significant is it for her to get this letter from Sir Michael?
Oh, I think it's huge. It's a massive recognition, and, you know, it took the bravery of Sue and other families to bring this matter through the courts before the MOD were actually doing anything about it. So it must be, you know, a huge momentous thing for her to receive this after all she's been through. So I can thoroughly understand how she must feel. But the problem that I have is that whilst Michael Fallon is writing this letter on one hand, on the other hand, it took so long to change this snatched Land Rover, not because the MOD thought it was the wrong equipment, but through the courts. They wanted a recognition from the courts that they were owed no duty of care to the armed forces sending them to war in the wrong equipment.
Yeah, they didn't get that, though, did they?
No, they didn't. The reasoning behind that is, quite rightly, in a combat situation, the courts feel that thinking is impaired, and if you make a mistake, then you can't bring a claim against the MOD. But what has happened is that the MOD are trying to stretch that to a desk in Whitehall. Buying the wrong equipment for the men and women on the front line should be covered by combat immunity, and the courts have said no. But Fallon, whilst writing this letter, on the other hand, in February has brought out, not content with the courts won't agree with him, he's brought out a consultation paper and asking Parliament to change the law so that they owe no duty of care whatsoever to the men and women on the front line if they send them with the wrong equipment, which I think is outrageous.
And as you say, contrary to everything certainly that Sue Smith has fought for since the death of her son, and not just her, it was a long journey, wasn't it, through the legal system right the way to the Supreme Court, and even then it took the criticism of Sir John Chilcot in his report on Iraq to finally bring the MOD around. It was an immense journey, and you know, the men and women on the ground knew for 2 years that this vehicle wasn't correct. There were so many deaths in it. And Sue talks about a change in her son Philip when he came home because he recognised that the risks they were taking in this terrible vehicle. But, you know, Sue and the other families, they fought long and hard through the courts, and if it wasn't for them, this vehicle wouldn't have been changed. And the MOD will cite, you know, lawyers bringing long legal cases. It wasn't the lawyers acting for Sue Smith, it was the MOD themselves who didn't want a ruling that they owed a duty of care in those circumstances. So they fought it right the way to appeal until they eventually decided the courts weren't going to go in their favour. And behind the scenes, they're plotting to wriggle out of the duty of care they owe to the men and women on the front line with this consultation paper. And how controversial is that? I mean, do you get a sense that there will be concern in Parliament over this? Because the government obviously doesn't have a majority in the House of Commons, does it? That's true. It is worrying. And hand in hand with this, although they're wriggling out of their duty of care, they'll say, don't worry, we'll give you an absolute shed load of money. And if you ask most parents who have lost someone in war, or those that come back with serious injury, what they would like, they'd prefer this money to be spent on the right equipment so it doesn't happen in the first place, rather than saying we don't owe a duty of care, but don't worry, we'll give you a lot of money if something happens. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. We're very grateful to you. Hilary Meredith there, visiting Professor of Law and Veterans Affairs at Chester University.